Hello and welcome, everybody. So, my name is Steven, and this is the show where we bring together experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in the industry, the HR industry. Today, we're going to be talking about performance improvement plans, or PIPs, as people sometimes call them. And we have four amazing panelists. I'm going to intro each of them right now, and they're going to do a little song and dance while I say their names. We've got Joy Banfield with us, who is a VP of People Operations at Designity. We have Heather Anderson, who is an HR manager at SP Plus. We've got Naomi Pekovsky, who is a senior level HR professional. And we have Ryan Archibald with us as well, who is an HR business partner. And by the way, Naomi and Ryan are both for hire right now. So if you are struggling with tips right now and you're listening to them talk and are thinking, man, I just want them to do it. I want them to help me. I want them to take over. Absolutely reach out to them after this conversation. All right, let's talk about PIPs. Let's give our audience some definitions, right? Maybe they're hearing about performance improvement plans for the first time. Heather, why don't you kick us off? What is a PIP?
A PIP. Um, One of the many acronyms you will hear, which does stand for Performance Improvement Plans. And it's basically, in the easiest way to put it, is just a very detailed document to do exactly what its title is to help improve the performance. So you're working with an employee to identify clear and specific areas for improvement with them, and it's documented down so that you can work with them on that one-on-one basis to really help them improve their performance, to help them succeed.
Yeah, love it. We're going to dive into each aspect of that in a second here, but now we have that baseline definition. As we were kind of preparing for this panel, I had some conversations with people who sort of questioned whether or not PIPs were actually useful in improving performance. So I want to address that question up front too. Give the listeners a reason to continue listening and knowing that executing on our performance improvement plan is actually going to work. And I want to hear Joy, Ryan, Naomi, all three of your opinions on this. And Heather, you're welcome to step in as well. But the first part of this question is, can they help improve performance? And then maybe the more important one is, what do you see as the difference between a successful performance improvement plan and an unsuccessful performance improvement plan? So, Joy, kick us off first. Drop some wisdom here.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that there are definitely cases in which PIPs work. If you're doing them correctly, if you're putting the right information in there, if you're using them to hold an employee accountable and checking in regularly and following the steps, then yeah, I absolutely think that there can be times that PIPs are very, very valuable.
Ryan, what about you? And then Naomi as well. And what do you think is maybe the maybe some key differences between successful and unsuccessful ones? We've got Steven, by the way, chiming in. Excited topic. So, no pressure.
I think the difference in terms of a successful PIP is the mindset of the manager and HR involved. I'm going to be bold and just say PIPs are not a bad thing. This employee just needs some extra attention, a more detailed plan to get them up to speed at where they should be. Just saying, hey, we're dedicated to helping you succeed, and this is the plan on how we're going to do that. And to emphasize what Joy said on that checking in, that communication, always following up, just saying, hey, does this make sense? Why this is the right path to go? And making sure they feel comfortable in saying, hey, Joy, this is what I just finished. Is this in line with what I should be accomplishing as well? Because then from my perspective, it gives a chance for trust to grow back in that relationship. Because at this point, it might be a last ditch effort to save the employee before a termination, to just rebuild that, just say, yes, you're doing great, keep going.
Yeah. If I'm hearing you correctly too, Ryan, it sounds like you mentioned mindset in the beginning. It's like, are you in the mindset of having this plan in order to have an excuse to terminate the employee, or in order to truly help them? Is that kind of a sense like, we're trying to help you with this plan?
Right on the money.
Yep. Naomi, what about you? What do you think?
I would say I would take it even one step further than the mindset and how it's presented to the employee, and presenting it as a positive rather than a punitive step, and making sure that you pick the right number. You want 3 to 4 items of performance that need to be addressed, not 10. And I usually coach the people that I support that they should have weekly, not bi-weekly. Like, they should be having weekly meetings with their employee on a PIP, and they cannot be canceled. So even if there's nothing to report, they still need to have those meetings so that they keep up that level and line of communication all the time, and the manager shows the employee that they're there for them.
Yeah, love that. So clear communication, expectations, another big part of a successful one. Well, great. Okay, so they work. We're already starting to get some tips on how to do them. Let's now take a step back and decide, when do we need them? And I'm specifically thinking, like, there's some issues that feel like more like discipline issues, and there's some issues that feel like performance, and maybe there's things that you just fire someone outright for. I mean, I know there are, but let's maybe go through that and say, when is a PIP appropriate versus some other action? Heather, let's bring you back in here, and then whoever else wants to jump in as well is welcome to.
Figuring out what the best way to do it really comes down to your progressive discipline policy and your process. So I would check first with your company there. And if you don't have one, then this is definitely something to look at, right? Is it, and really depends on the issue too. So when you're looking at things like, is it a simple retraining that you can use regular progressive disciplinary form and then the issues just resolve and there's no issue and we're good to go? Have you talked to this employee multiple times about the same issue and it's just not getting resolved? That would be a good indicator of, hey, you know what, they probably need a little bit extra attention. We need to look at that. What level of employee do you want to be able to issue PIPs to? Some companies, it can be anybody. It could be anybody from frontline all the way up to senior leadership. Others are only looking at managerial titles. So really, what kind of title is your company deciding to use it for? But I've always done, like, when we've constantly worked with an employee, we've given them the progressive discipline and it's just still not getting done despite everything, that's when I've usually moved into, let's look at it a little bit more in detail. We've given them opportunities, we've retrained, they're a good employee, they're just not picking it up. So let's spend a little bit more detailed time with them. Whereas with my company now, PIPs are only used for managers and above. So we use progressive discipline for frontline employees. And then with our managerial, it's usually we are giving them that first coaching, do the written verbal. And then as you go into the written documentation for the progressive disciplinary stances, that's when we look at, okay, let's really get into detail. We want to make sure these managers are succeeding. Let's nip it in the bud sooner rather than later and really help make sure they have the training and the tools and everything that they need to succeed, and put a little bit more emphasis on it. So I think it really depends on what your company's wanting to do. And that's a great conversation to sit down with your senior leadership on, of as you're developing these plans of, what do we want it to look like for us, and where does everyone feel comfortable doing this at, and having that conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have specific policies on who can actually receive them lined out. Let's let the rest of the group weigh in. Anyone else have a thought on, when would you know that it's a good time for a PIP versus some other form of discipline or something similar?
I would say if it's a simple violation of a company policy, it's not going to be a PIP. It's going to be more of a complex issue where, again, like Heather said, you've had those conversations and it's much more of a training and accountability type of situation than just breaking or violating a policy or a procedure, and where you can have a very simple conversation about it.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think we covered that one pretty well. Let's talk about now what a PIP actually looks like. So is this a written document? Is this an email? Is this just a conversation in your office? Ryan and Joy, how about you guys weigh in here and and tell us a little bit about what that actually looks like.
So
Joy, you go
I would
first.
say,
Yeah.
sure. So I would say that if we're at the point where we are initiating a PIP, it should be a more formal document, because you're going to want to use it to track some success metrics in there. So it's much more than a phone call or even an email. I, like Heather was talking about, sort of a progressive approach to discipline. I would say some sort of email communication back and forth would be a documented conversation, versus how a PIP is more formalized. It should have, specifics around what needs to be improved on, what success looks like, and then what happens if we don't succeed.
So have I heard those three components right? So, what needs to be improved on, you said, and you had deadlines, and then there were consequences. Did I
Basically, yeah, like not just deadlines, but success metrics. So like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
the expectation, if it's a PIP for attendance, then the expectation is you don't have attendance issues within another 60 days, and it's something you can specifically go back and refer to. And then you're right, like continued progressive discipline. If this first level PIP doesn't work, then we go on to the next and the next and the next.
Yeah. Ryan, anything you would add there to the
I would add
on the page and do an employee or whatever?
Yeah, just a line of events of what brought us here to this point.
Mm-hmm.
Looping in what Heather said, talking about training, just said, hey, when you first started, this is what you were given. And then as time went on, these are the mistakes that we saw. These are the actions we took. That's when notes on retraining. You can never be too detailed on these things. So if it's a manufacturing environment with part numbers, just say, hey, these part numbers are what was missed. And this is the steps that we took as the company to help you. These are the written warnings or suspensions, heaven forbid. Mm-hmm. And then you can jump into what Joy said about this is the problem that we're facing. And that timeline really helps you and the employee just understand, okay, we've done everything we can up to this point for the employee, but it's just not sinking in. And that's a great chance for the employee to say, I don't remember that meeting on December 2nd.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, let's talk about it. This is what was involved, and this is the step that we took.
Yeah. Forward
as well. So
love it. I think, and you're already taking us into kind of our next topic, which is around communicating the PIP. So Naomi, maybe let's start you off on this one, because you talked a lot about communication earlier. Let's say, whoever's listening to this right now, they put together a PIP just like Ryan and Joy have described. They've got it in their hands, and they're probably now all of a sudden very nervous about a conversation they have to have with somebody. Can you just kind of walk that person through how they would go about that? Is it even them who's giving the PIP out, or is it the manager of the employee? What does that communication look like?
Well, I am an advocate, and I always tell managers no kind of discipline should ever be a surprise. It should be a meeting. HR should be there to support, but HR does not lead the meeting. Just like HR should not be writing the PIP, they should be reviewing it. And I oftentimes get legal to review it just to make sure. I'm in California, so we need to have our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and you want it in writing if you're in California. So it's setting up a meeting. You can let them know you're going to be having a conversation about performance. I wouldn't go much further than that. You want to meet with the manager ahead of time, give them some talking points, let them know that you're going to be more of an observer and a mediator. I tend to have to jump in a lot of times if there gets to be some sort of confrontation or uncomfortable, not silences, but people can get, an employee may react very violently, and you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And if you think the employee is going to react violently, make sure you have security or someone waiting outside as well to protect you. Unfortunately, these are things we have to think about now.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
Or no, keep going.
It's setting the manager up for success and letting them know that you're there for support. And to have a transparent and it's a collaborative conversation, and to remind them to listen.
Yeah. Heather, do you want to weigh in here? Because I know you have a lot of employee relations experience, and in the past I've heard you talk about kind of having these really difficult, maybe emotionally charged conversations. What advice do you have for that moment?
They're so hard. And if you've never done one before, it can be very, very scary. So you want to make sure that you go into a PIP understanding that these conversations are probably going to be very similar to other progressive discipline conversations that you're going to have. You want to make sure that you understand the employee, have someone in there with you, especially if just if they're of a different gender, or you just don't want to put yourself in any kind of compromising position. So it's always good to have someone else in there with you. We've had times where we just give other managers a heads up of, hey, we're going to be in here discussing it with this person. They have had times in the past where we are slightly concerned that this may get a little bit out of control. So please be next to your chat or to your Slack, or by your phone. And I always take my laptop in there with me, and I have the chat up. So that way, I'm taking notes on the conversation, but in the event that it gets scary, I can immediately message over to one of my managers and say, hey, go ahead and give them a call, or like, hey, we're going to need you to intervene. So that way we're just being super safe. In the event where, I've worked with armed security guards, the rule was no firearms in the building when you come in to see management, no matter what the reason, just as an added precaution. And you just have to think of those safety things. And it's kind of sad, but at the same time, it's just where we're at with the world these days. And your safety and the safety of your employees and your managers are just, you got to keep that top priority. At the end of the day, the whole point of these conversations is you're there to help them. You're there to help them succeed, and making sure that you're being empathetic and that you're validating their feelings, because they're probably going to come in and get very frustrated. They might get defensive. They might try and place blame other places. And being prepared for having those crucial conversations is very, very important. And it will help you control it. They're going to try and place blame other places. Just keep circling back around to, yes, we're just here to help you, and keep the focus in that positive tone, like has been mentioned, that keep it in that positive light, to make sure they know that we're just here to help you. We want to see you succeed. We're invested in you, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if we weren't. We want to see you do well, and really stress those points if they get super upset. And keeping that positive tone is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we could take a moment to kind of address that, like kind of the worst case scenario, and appreciate the thoughts that are shared. But I think in our scenario, we want to assume that the employee understands that HR is trying to help them. And let's just kind of move on the timeline. Let's just assume that things go well and they accept the PIP. I know they typically sign it, right? And there's some sort of more formal like agreement there. How do you now support that employee as they're going to improve whatever metric it is that you found that they needed to improve? Ryan and Joy, I'd love for you guys to start us off on this one. What do you think? What can you be doing until they to help them achieve their goals?
You go first this time, Ryan.
Okay, thanks. I think it's during that initial meeting, just double checking in just to say, hey, do you have any questions? Does this make sense at this point? Because the manager is going to be delivering that, and just say, hey, this is what we need you to do. It's just like, hey, so what support do you need any extra support? What can we do as a company to help you get to that? So when they leave that, they know, okay, I felt a little bit heard at least. And then depending on what the request is, I would partner with the manager that says, hey, what can I do to help to measure this? Even if it's being the mediator for those weekly check-ins, as Naomi mentioned, just to make sure, just say, hey, things are going well, or this is what we saw. We just want to understand what led up to this decision being made or something.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I guess the only thing that I would emphasize even more is just making sure that before you leave that room, everybody has a really clear understanding of what success looks like. And that can be really hard because, like Heather was saying, the employee can get in there and be defensive, and they can be spending that whole conversation just coming up with excuses or reasons why this behavior is an issue. And like, I've had cases where I know that the employee did not hear 95% of the conversation because they were so stressed about the moment that they were in. So it's about stepping back and making sure, and then maybe even setting a time to follow up with both the employer and the employee, just to say, to circle back or send an email to everybody, just circling back to everything that we covered during this conversation. Because then if you send an email, it's documented again. But just to make sure that everyone understands like the what, the why, and the how.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. Heather and Naomi, I want to give you a chance though, if you have any other thoughts on this topic before we move on to our next section. Any thoughts on supporting that employee?
Go ahead.
The only thing I would say is make sure you give them a copy of the form, and then to Joy and Ryan's point, say, here, take this home, read it, and then set up that meeting for afterwards when they've had a chance to settle down and actually process.
Yeah.
Can we take it a little bit more towards the communication aspect with this? And something I love is when we're setting up the PIP, we have this beautiful outline where with each, like Naomi said, three or four things, you don't want it to be a huge list. And so with each one of the areas for improvement, we list out what it is that they're doing, what the expectation is, what we need from them so that it's, measurable, it's timely, they understand what it is, and then what we're going to do to help them. So anything we've already thought of, we're going to list it out in that. So we're having that conversation with them, and then ask them, in addition to that, what more do you feel like we could do to support you? And sometimes those conversations can lead to other conversations where you might have to look at, like, is it an ADA? Is it an FMLA? Is it some of these other factors that you didn't know about? That conversation has come up plenty of times where I've brought somebody in for some kind of a progressive disciplinary talk, only to find out that the reason why was something we should be accommodating them for an ADA reason or for an FMLA reason. So be prepared to potentially look at those things and make sure to follow those processes as well, just as an extra FYI, because then again, it's just another way we're saying we are going to help you. We're going to support you, and offer up the training, offer to take the training, with them, or take it beforehand so kind of what it is. With those weekly check-ins and setups, ask them, be like, hey, so what did you learn from this training? Was there something that wasn't confusing? Make sure to ask those probing questions so that you're not just going to get those, yeah, no, it was fine. No, it's great.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. Like, you want to get more of an involvement with them in those conversations and not just the atypical, nope, I'm fine, it's okay.
Yeah.
Make sure that they're really picking up what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully, obviously, the end goal is to better their performance, make it better than what it was, and then you have this total rock star coming out on the other side of it, in a beautiful situation. But on the other side of it, it will provide you that you've literally done everything you can with this employee to help them, and maybe this just isn't the job for them, but it's very obvious to see for everyone involved, including the employee, where they're like, what? Yeah, this just isn't what I want.
Yeah.
So it's having as much transparency as possible. And yes, abso-freaking-lutely. Yes. Give them copies and follow up afterwards, because it's a lot. It's almost like, the stress of orientation, where they hand you the booklet of everything you're supposed to remember. You want to follow up with them shortly after and just check in, be like, hey, how are you feeling after this? Have you thought of anything else we can do to help support you? And put it in the PIP of when you're going to be meeting, so that way it's written down, and that follow up, like Joy said, with just the extra documentation of making sure that you're pushing that communication. So there's multiple places where you're telling them when you're meeting, what the goals are going to be, when the conversations are going to take place, so they can never come back and say, well, you didn't tell me. It's like, no, we did.
Yeah.
We told you like 5 times. So here's where they're at. So it's always that clear, transparent communication. And if they look confused, don't be afraid to call that out. Be like, you know, you look confused. Is there anything I can clarify for you? You know, what questions do you have? Because they may just be stunned and have no idea. So all of it is just good.
Love it. Be really thorough and transparent. I think we got some great advice there. Let's talk about Judgment Day. So the deadlines or whatever that are in the PIP have come, and there's one of two things has happened. Either they've succeeded or they have failed. So I want to talk about both of those scenarios and what you'd recommend that HR people do, especially. Naomi and Ryan, I'd love to have you two cover kind of the successful outcome, and then Joy and Heather, you can do the failure. But I mean, if they complete, they've raised their performance significantly, well above what you had put out, do they get a raise? Do they get a promotion? Are they just off the PIP? I mean, do you celebrate? Do you still watch them because maybe they'll fall back? I mean, what do you recommend, Naomi, and then Ryan as well?
I don't know if I've ever seen anyone get a raise or a promotion after coming off of a PIP, because you're getting them back to that meets expectation level of their job. If they exceed that and for some reason they have a miraculous growth spurt, then you may want to recognize them. However, I think it's still, you have a meeting with them, you let them know that they successfully completed it with their manager there. I would still recommend, and I do this with my team, and I always recommend it, having weekly one-on-ones with your team, just because you need to know what's going on. And as we move towards design thinking and agile, right, we want to have those stand-up meetings and know what's going on. So you spend all this time building the trust between the employee and their manager, so you want to keep that going and build it even further. So that's what I would probably do if it was successful.
Yeah. Ryan, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the documentation. I'd show the results to them. So if they were at a 10% productivity and they jumped to 110, show them that. Being like, do you see this is what happened once we implemented X, Y, and Z? And you were able to rock star this. And this is what you should be doing going forward. And then at the end of that meeting, just saying you did it, you're off it, you're back to being a regular employee. Just asking them, do you feel like you can do this going forward?
Yeah.
I mean, the performance improvement plan, you should be able to have confidence in them, but I always have them just do that double check-in. Be like, is there any last minute support to make sure that we don't come back to this again?
Yeah.
Because it might be saying, I really liked these meetings every week before we never met before. Mm-hmm. And then that manager should be like, okay, then that means I got to meet with my team every week to make sure that they're on track.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice there. Let's go to the not so happy scenario now and give Joy and Heather a crack at this. Joy, maybe you could start us off. And I'm curious, especially because earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that, an employee might have 2 or 3 PIPs or 4, or maybe there'd be a follow-up PIP. Is that, in what scenario would you say, okay, you failed this one, but let's go into the next one? Or what other consequences typically happen?
Yeah. So the times that I've seen successful multiple PIPs work is more in a production environment, or where you have attendance, dress code issues, that type of thing, where there may be clear violations. And with that, you can stack on, we gave you all of these abilities to fix this. We counseled you through it. And then you move on to that level 2 PIP. I've seen as much as 5 levels of this, where you have a verbal warning, a documented conversation warning, a PIP 1, a PIP 2, and then a final warning. Wow. So I've seen it in larger companies. Obviously, this doesn't work for 8-person company, but in larger companies, you have this type of thing where they can see very clearly and they know ahead of time what progressive discipline may look like. So those are times when I think it makes sense to have multiple levels. If you're at a smaller company, then likely you can accomplish everything you need to cover in a single PIP. You just keep revisiting it, and you may have to update it or revise it or talk about how you accomplished 3 of the 4 things listed, but we do still need to work on this 4th one. So really what you want to be seeing in order for a PIP to be successful is at least some movement. Are we headed in the right direction? Are we making some progress? And in that case, then you may be willing to revise it further down the road at 30 days, 60 days, what have you, to adjust for those things. But that's when I've seen multiple layers work, is the larger companies. It's much more difficult to maneuver something like that in a small organization.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Heather, Joy over here is saying that we don't just fire the employee immediately if they don't hit all the things in the PIP. Do you agree with that, or should we just go for it? Should we just get rid of anyone who can't meet expectations, even if they've got a lot of progress?
Oh, you don't want to just fire anybody. It all comes down to the individual situation, the individual company, and the individual themselves. And it's a hard decision, right? Firing or terminating or separating with someone, whatever terminology you use, is a hard decision. And it's probably one of the worst things we have to do as HR, because you're affecting the company and the employee and their livelihood, and it sucks. So it's hard to do it no matter what. But if you've got a PIP, and again, this depends on your company and depending on the policy. If you're on a PIP, some companies are like, this is the last ditch effort. Like this, we've done everything we can. This is it. When you're spending such amount of time and detail with this person. And the reason why it's so important to do those weekly check-ins is just like Joy said, to be able to adjust. Because if you're not seeing movement, even a little bit, maybe you're not doing what's best. Maybe we do need to go in and revisit it and readjust and call those things out early. Because again, the whole point of the PIP is to help them succeed. So if they're not, and you haven't seen, like, say you have put them on a 3-month PIP, and after the first month, you're not seeing any movement. There's no improvement. They're still not getting it. There may be pushback a little bit, confrontation possibly. Then, look at it, sit them down and say, we've gone through this. This is everything we've done, and we're still not seeing improvement. What's going on? Like, what do we need to change? But say you've gone the full PIP route, you've adjusted as needed, and the performance just still isn't there. And that's when you have that conversation of, hey, we've given you everything from beginning to end. Here's everything we've reviewed in the PIP. The performance has not improved. You're still not meeting those standards. You can always ask that last ditch effort of, what is it that's really hindering you from getting, from succeeding in this role? And, is this something you really want to do? Because it could be that they just really don't want to do it. Like, that's highly possible. But it's being very clear with those expectations at the beginning of the PIP. And again, depending on your company, if it is termination, then you need to follow through with what it is that you said, because you're setting a precedence. Because if you put them on a PIP and you tell them, if there's no improvement on this, we will be moving towards termination, and you don't, then the next time that happens and you do fire someone, they can come back and say, well, that's not what happened with so-and-so. And then you just open yourself up for potential lawsuits, and you don't want to do that. You have to be consistent in what you say. So if you are choosing to have that PIP as that last ditch effort and they're still not meeting, be very transparent with them about it. I mean, they should know, but go into that conversation ready for it, and are you going to be separating with them at the end of it? Or, are you going to give them a little bit of time to, process, what does that look like? And really, I think that comes down with any termination that you give them. Being at the bottom of, the ending of a PIP, a termination there shouldn't be any different than termination with any other issue. So it's just being mindful again of their feelings and being very, very transparent.
Yeah. Joy, I saw you unmuting. Do you have, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. I think you highlight something really important too. Is they should know that if this is the last ditch effort, the next step leads to termination. In fact, that's a way to protect your own business as a whole, is to make sure that the employees know along the way, if we don't see immediate sustained improvement, this could lead to a termination. That needs to be written in there. It needs to be told to them. That I've seen that either win or lose a an unemployment case if they know versus if they don't know. So make sure that it is very, very transparent.
Yeah. Well, that was our last major topic, but we're not going to end on a downer, which is firing others. We always give everyone one last opportunity to kind of share a final piece of wisdom, maybe something we didn't cover in this conversation, or just catch-all advice on the topic. We'll start with Ryan, and then we'll go to Naomi, Heather, and then Joy. We'll give you the last word. Again, the actual question here is, in a sentence or two, what is your final piece of advice for somebody who is working on PIPs right now and they're in HR?
Oh, that's a loaded question because I've got so many thoughts in my head. I think the main thing is, has the company done their part to support the employee up to this point?
Yeah.
Because if before you even go to a disciplinary action or a PIP, find those gaps. Say, is the gap on the employee side or is it on our side? Because last thing you want to do is falsely accuse someone of being on a PIP when they say, Joy, I was actually never trained on that. And then come to find out, oh, you're right, Brian never was trained on that. Let's fix that.
Yeah. That's great. Naomi, over to you. Final piece of advice.
Try and avoid them. So really create the psychological safety in the open spaces for employees to come to you and let them know that they're not getting what they need, and train managers on how to look at skills gaps and really set expectations so that you can have open, honest conversations. Yes, you may need to document them, but to the point where they can be fixed early on and you don't need to do a PIP.
Yeah. Awesome. Heather?
Oh, I'm kind of like Ryan. I'm like, there's so many. But I would say the biggest things is be specific, be very transparent, make sure that you are doing what you said you would do, and follow through. That's so, so, so important. You can't expect this employee to do it on their own. That's why we're making the effort to have this documented plan to help them succeed. So just as much as you're expecting them to put in that effort, you need to give it that 110% effort as well.
Yeah. Joy, last word to you.
Yeah, I'm going to go in a different direction because you guys pretty much said it all for how to put the document together and present that to the individual. But again, I'm going to go back to the company side of things. It is never too early to put some sort of process in place for these kinds of things. So even if you are a small business owner or an HR department of one, it's really critical to start doing something consistent early on, because you may think, oh, I have 10 people working for me and we're all doing great together. At some point, you're going to be hiring more people. There will be gaps, and this can come into play. And if you find yourself in a position where you need something and you have not thought of it, you could get in a tough spot and not be able to help the employee the way that everyone else has spoken about. So it's never too early to put a process in place.
Perfect. Love it. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you four so much for being on here. As you all were talking at the end there, I was thinking too, like this is a good parenthood conversation too. I feel like a lot of parents should watch this and learn a thing or two about how to be a good parent. But really appreciate you for being here. Everyone who's watching at home or who will watch this later, go visit our HR Encyclopedia entry on this topic. It's funny, the longest entry in the HR Encyclopedia is this one. So it's like close to 7,000 words. It's 5 times our typical size. So there's a lot of good nuggets in there. So go read that. We also have, I think, 10 or 15 topics on offboarding. If it does come to that, we've got 60 or so on different employee development topics. Hopefully a lot of supplemental materials. But our number one recommendation is always to hop on LinkedIn, connect with these 4. And if you have additional questions, advice, or you want to offer anyone on this panel a job, you can take your best shot. They have lots of other good opportunities too, but you can take your best shot. So thank you, everyone. We hope everyone has an amazing rest of their day, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Oh.